Come be a part of Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics with your host, Dr. Ed Holliday. Hear the voices of liberty speaking all across America. Doc Holliday provides thought-provoking interviews and commentary about the issues and actions that are afflicting this country and what we need to do to get America back on track. Get fired up, get inspired, get on board with Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics right now.
And here we go.
And once again, that is the sound of rock cracking. You've got Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics right here on webtalkradio.net. That's webtalkradio.net. We're glad to have you, each and every one of you. I'm your host, Dr. Ed Holliday, and we're going to talk about the Arizona vote audit. The Senate in Arizona called for an audit, a thorough audit of the votes in Maricopa County. Why? Because, well, President Trump was defeated by about 12,000 votes there in Arizona. So we're going to talk about what some of those results were in this week's show. One thing I can tell you, the media went off with the story because it said the final said Joe Biden ended up with a few hundred more votes and Trump actually lost a few votes when they tallied everything up. And the media ran with that, and that's all you heard about it. But they said nothing about the problems within the vote. Problems like 86,391 voters cannot be accounted for. They don't have a date of birth. They don't have a social security number. They don't have an address. Nobody can find them. 86,000 voters, 86,391 in the state of Arizona. Well, we got some reasons why that happened. We got some more problems within the vote, and the media won't look at it. So that's why you're listening to Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. We're going to look into that. Before we do, let me just talk a little bit about the socialists, the Democrats. It's one and the same because Bernie Sanders is charging ahead with that party. You know, Bernie Sanders was leading and would have been the Democratic nominee in 2020, but they had a smoke-filled room, and of all people, Elizabeth Warren, she would not drop out of that race. If she had dropped out and Sanders would have got her votes, he very well could have been the Democratic nominee. They got all the other Democrats to drop out except for Elizabeth Warren, and all the others, their votes went to Joe Biden. So in a smoke-filled room, Bernie Sanders was denied his nomination. He really had the most votes, was going to end up with the most delegates. And the Democrats got together in a smoke-filled room, and you remember Buttigieg and all the ones running that had some votes, but not enough. They all of a sudden they all dropped out one weekend. So Joe Biden could be the nominee. And because they were scared to death of Bernie Sanders. Why? Because he would have won the nomination. But he's throwing his power out now because he wants that infrastructure bill along with the $3.5 trillion. So we're talking about $5 trillion that Bernie Sanders and the socialists, which means the Democrats now. He's leading, he's pushing for this, and the Democrats are all a part of it, except for Joe Manchin and maybe send them out in Arizona. We don't know. We've got to wait and see what all comes out. We're taping the show a little early. It may shake out by the time this is aired. But I'm just telling you that Bernie Sanders is pulling his socialist muscle, and we're seeing that the socialists are at the heart of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party of your mom and dad, your granddaddy, no longer exists. It is a socialist party. And there's some people that say, we need this, we need this, we need this. And there's some good things out there when you talk about paying for college education, making everything free, making pre-kindergarten free, everything's free. Guess what? Somebody's paying for it, and say, oh, we're just going to tax the rich, like on the back of AOC's dress, tax the rich. Well, you know what? When they, just remember in the income tax, when they got it through with a constitutional amendment back in the early 1900s, they said it's only going to be the rich people getting taxed. We're going to push this amendment, and only the rich people will ever have to pay an income tax. Yeah. How long did that last? So when they say, oh, we're only just going to tax the billionaires, how long do you think that's going to last? And they say, we're just going to tax the billionaires, anybody that makes over $400,000. And guess what? In the bill, it says if you have over $600, if you have over $600 in a bank and making transactions, you will be reported to the IRS. They'll know every move you make, when you pick your nose, when you pick your teeth, when you floss your teeth. They want to know everything you're spending on, what's going on in your bank account if you got $600. They say they only want to tax the billionaires. Why do they want to know everything that's over $600 that happens in your bank account? Why does the government want to spy on you? The Democrat socialists, they want to spy on you. It sounds more and more like Eastern Europe, like East Germany before the wall came down. Wow. And people voted for these people. I'm telling you, the Democrat Party no longer exists. It is the Socialist Party that wants it's thirsty for power and government control of every part of your life. Mandates. You have to do it or you cannot work. How's that going for America? And we got freedom in our DNA and liberty, and people falling under these mandates, letting people voting for the people who want the government to watch anything over $600 happening in every bank account in America. Why do they need to know that information? And yet people are voting for these government control freaks. They want to control our life with climate change. They worship climate change like it's a religion because they thirst for power like Dracula thirsts for blood. They're out to get you. Stop voting for Democrats till they kick the socialists out of their party, because they are socialist. The Democratic Party can change its name because it's the Socialist Party. Until they kick them out, they're the Socialist Party of America. The Democratic Party has become the socialist. So stop just pandering around and stop playing footsies with these Democrats, because they're socialist. And they're people who mean good from their heart. They really want to do some things. I understand that. But there are people who want this country to fall. They want it to just break up so they can start over. And they, just like the communists everywhere, let's start with day one and get rid of all the history. Do you not see it happening, America? Wow. We got to get to what happened in the Arizona vote. Take a listen to this.
Thank you. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an unfortunate reality of today's politics that Democrats do not believe in democracy. They believe in power. It speaks volumes that S1, the very first bill introduced by Chuck Schumer and the Democrats in this Senate, is a bill for the federal government to take over elections and to strike down virtually every reasonable voter integrity law adopted across the country. It is likewise the case that H.R. 1, the first bill introduced by Nancy Pelosi, is the same bill, a federal takeover of elections designed to strike down virtually every reasonable voter integrity law in the country. The priority of Democrats is not COVID, as the rhetoric might suggest. The priority of Democrats is not jobs. The priority of Democrats is not our national security. The priority of Democrats is to ensure that Democrats stay in power no matter what. No matter what the voters think. This bill before us is designed to prevent those pesky voters from ever making a decision other than electing Democrats. And it's a long tradition. Jim Crow was exactly the same thing. Democratic politicians writing laws, changing the election laws to ensure the voters could only elect Democrats. Sadly, there are decades of ugly history behind this. You know, before I was in the Senate, I was a constitutional litigator and Supreme Court litigator. I didn't do a lot of redistricting law, but I did in 2003 and 2004 and 2005 represent the state of Texas in the redistricting litigation that occurred then. And I have to say I agree with Chief Justice Roberts, who described in one voting rights case, it is a sordid business, this divvying us up by race, because that is much of what redistricting law is right now. It is focused on, in that case, we heard testimony. We heard testimony actually from African-American elected Democrats in Texas about the racist history of Democrats in Texas. And in particular, when the state legislature in 2003 passed a new congressional redistricting map, it was replacing a map that had been passed by Democrats in Texas that had been widely described as the most egregious gerrymander in the country. It was a map that, even though a substantial majority of Texans were voting consistently Republican, elected Democrats and a large majority of congressional Democrats, despite the views of the voters. And Democrats fought tooth and nail, including fleeing to Ardmore, Oklahoma, including fleeing to Albuquerque, New Mexico, to try to keep their partisan gerrymander in place, to elect Democrats, even though the voters didn't want to elect Democrats. And the testimony we heard at trial from African-American elected Democrats was that the strategy of white Democrats to elect white Democrats was very simple. A moment ago, we heard about thresholds of minority representations in districts. The testimony we heard at trial is that white Democrats knew that if you put a sufficient number of African-American voters in a district, but not too many, and a sufficient number of Hispanic voters in a district, but not too many, that in the primary, that the African-American Democratic voters would join with white Democratic voters in voting against an Hispanic Democrat, and that the Hispanic Democratic voters would join with white Democratic voters in voting against a black Democrat. And the result would be exactly what happened in Texas. White Democrats would win the primaries, and then those minority voters would vote for Democrats in the general, and it would ensure that white Democrats stay in power in perpetuity.
And that was Senator Cruz talking about putting a microscope, a magnifying glass, I guess you could say, on the Texas law that he knew and what was happening for white Democrats to stay in power. But the Democratic Party wants Democrats in power forever. We heard Senator Cruz just explain that at a hearing, at a Senate hearing. And the election law that Schumer and Pelosi both come up with first is they want to do away with any kind of voter integrity. And thank goodness people like Senator Cruz and others are pointing this out. And the American people have got to wake up. Not only is the Democratic Party become the Socialist Party, but socialists don't want real elections. They never have. They want people to go and not have a choice. But now in America there's still choices, so therefore they have to figure out ways to break down voter integrity, the voting integrity. And that's what the COVID virus gave them a perfect situation in 2020. And now we saw where just Governor Newsom made mail-in voting permanent, where it was just because of the 2020 pandemic. But now in California it's permanent. So is it the integrity of voting in California is better now or worse? Of course it's worse. There's so many things that the commission that Jimmy Carter and I believe former Secretary of State Baker put together, and they said the mail-in voting was the easiest thing to cheat on for fraud. So we have got our hands full of America. And I've said, I don't, as much as over the years we've had some decent Democrats and have done some things good for America in history. But right now, we have a rotten situation that's stinking up to high heaven. And the socialists, and they want nothing more than to take over America, and they're very close to getting it done. very close. So wake up, America. I know I'm talking